Guys, welcome to the channel. I'm Richard Holder, and here's the question for today. What happens when you run a 5.3 liter L33 all aluminum small block and an 8.1 liter Gen 7 big block, both with the same turbo at the same boost, making the same naturally aspirated power? What happens to the power curves? This video is proof positive that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, because this was not by design. But we're going to take a look at a very cool comparison between a truck Norris cammed 5.3 liter and an otherwise stock 8.1 liter Gen 7 big block. Now, I ran both of them with the same turbo, the same intercooler, same E85, same injectors, same management system, heck, even the same harness. But we ran them with the same turbo at the same boost. And the cool thing is both of these motors made the same peak power NA. So we'll take a look at the NA power curves. We're going to look at the torque curves. We're going to look at the power and torque curves under boost. Then we're also going to take a look at the boost and back pressure curves. Data overload. Let's get going. We're going to start off a comparison between the 5.3 liter and the 8.1 liter. Both run with the S475 turbo. I'll show you what they made naturally aspirated, which the numbers were very, very similar, at least in terms of peak power. And then we'll demonstrate what happened to both of those power curves when we ran the same amount of boost on both those motors. So we'll start off with the 5.3 liter. The 5.3 liter was my super junkyard score, which is an L33 all aluminum 5.3 liter. It came stock with 790 heads, aluminum block. It had the stock truck intake manifold on it. But to upgrade that, and as one of the tests that we did, we installed a truck Norris cam from Brian Tooley Racing, and that video is up if you want to check it out. You can see how well, and you'll see here, how well the truck Norris cam does under boost. And as we know, every cam really is a turbo cam. If we put a camshaft in this motor, which we did, and then we run boost on it, it just elevates whatever the power curve is at there with that camshaft. So let's take a look at our combination here. The 5.3 liter with the truck Norris cam, and we also installed valve springs on it. It had the factory truck intake and a stock drive-by, a manual throttle body. It had 1 7/8" long tube headers on it and collector extensions. We ran it with a Holley HP management system, and then with an electric water pump and all that, the way that we normally run these on the dyno. So run in naturally aspirated trim, our cammed 5.3 liter made 424 horsepower. Keep that number in mind, because we're going to take a look at the 8.1 liter that made exactly that as well. And peak torque checked in at 415 foot-pounds of torque for the 5.3 liter. But here's what happened when we added roughly 7 pounds of boost to this thing. And you can see we had our single S475 turbo. Our turbo setup consisted of the stock exhaust manifolds feeding the Y pipe done by Jason over at JT Fab. We had two 45mm Hypergate wastegates from TurboSmart. We had the Y pipe merge into a single 3-inch V-band, and then I had the 3-inch to T6 turbo adapter that we made, and then I also have one for the T4 and the T3 as well. But we ran the T6, the S475. We ran a 4-inch exhaust. We ran it on E85, and then had the turbo blowing into our air-to-water intercooler, which we ran with dyno water. We also had previously installed, when we ran the motor just with the camshaft and NA trim, we had run it with a set of 80-pound Excel injectors so that they were big enough to run this power output running E85 on the turbo combination. So running about 7 pounds, and we'll show you the boost curves on both of them. We made 633 horsepower. And peak torque checked in at 625 foot-pounds. So the 5.3 liter did very well. Now let's take a look and see what happened when we ran the same turbo at the same boost on the 8.1 liter big block. Now that we've taken a look at the 5.3 liter, we can jump right in and take a look at what happened when we added the same turbo and the same intercooler and the same E85 at the same boost level on the 8.1 liter. So this is our 8.1 Gen 7 big block Chevy. It was run all stock, except with long tube headers, and run in that manner with an electric water pump, just like we did with the 4.8, same Holley HP management system. In fact, we ran the same harness and everything, because the 8.1 has the same crank trigger as the LS, and it has coil packs exactly the same as the LS, so we just ran the whole harness on the 8.1 as well. So run with long tube headers, basically, the otherwise stock 8.1 liter. We also had a manual throttle body on it from the Gen 6. It produced 424 horsepower, 423.6, and peak torque was 554 foot-pounds. So here's what happened when we added the single S475 and air-to-water intercooler run on E85 on the 8.1 liter. You can see it did the same thing that it did on the 5.3. It just elevated exactly the same as the NA curve. It just elevated everything. So run with 6 pounds or 7 pounds of boost. Our 8.1 liter produced 637 horsepower, 637, 638. So a little bit squeaked out a little bit more than the 5.3, but not by much. But a massive 848 foot-pounds of torque. So that's really the big difference between the two. The peak horsepower numbers started out about the same and ended about the same, but the peak torque numbers were dramatically different because the original NA torque number was dramatically different because the big motor makes power at such a lower engine speed. Now let's take a look at a comparison between the 5.3 and the 8.1 power curves, and then take a look at the very cool boost and back pressure curves of both combos. Now that we took a look at what each of them did under boost, the 5.3 and the 8.1, we can kind of compare the power curves. So this is the horsepower curve. I'm not going to put horsepower and torque up there right now because it gets too confusing because they're so dramatically different in the shapes of the curves. It gets confusing as to which is which. So this is the horsepower curve of the NA 5.3 liter with a truck Norris cam in it. And this is the horsepower curve of the NA 8.1 liter. So you can see that they both make about, well, almost exactly the same peak power. 423.6 and 423.9, so very, very close in terms of peak power. They just do it at a dramatically different engine speed, whereas the 5.3 liter made peak power out at 6,500. The 8.1 liter made it at 4,400. So it was we have a difference of about 2,000 RPM. What that translates to is into the fact that the bigger motor makes a lot more torque, and that's why we saw it, despite the fact that they made the same peak horsepower. But look at all of this extra power, and the lower engine speeds, and we'll see that more when we take a look at torque. But let's take a look and see what happened when we added turbos to both of these horsepower curves. So this will be the red now is the boosted horsepower curve of the truck Norris cam. You can see it just mirrors what happened with the NA version. And then here is the turbo horsepower curve of the 8.1 liter. And again, it just mirrored it, but you see the same thing. Both of the horsepower curves with boost, basically they just elevate what's there. This was the same turbo, the same intercooler, both run with the 85, same management systems. We ran the same amount of boost on both of them, and you can see we produced roughly the same peak horsepower with both the combinations starting out at the same NA power, so it's not surprising that they made the same peak power at the same boost level, or as close as we could get it. But the important thing is that the horsepower curves mirrored the NA curves. All it did was elevate what's there. So when I tell you that every cam is a turbo cam, the stock 8.1 liter cam obviously is a turbo cam. We ran boost on it and it just elevated the curve. The truck Norris cam also is a turbo cam because it just elevated the existing power curve there. But dramatically different shapes of the curves based on the displacement. So I could show you the same thing with torque, but we would see the same deal. Now let's take a look at the boost and back pressure curves, because that's really interesting in a comparison between these two motors. So before we take a look at the boost and back pressure curves, it was important that I show you the torque curves too, even they're going to be very similar in terms of how different they are that we saw in the horsepower curves. But this is our torque curve with the truck Norris cam and NA trim, you can see. And then here's what happened when we added boost to that. Basically, again, we just added 7 pounds everywhere, and the torque curve mirrors the NA curve when it's under boost. Here is the torque curve of the 8.1 liter NA, and you can see it's having, in fact, the torque curve of the NA 8.1 is kind of approaching the numbers offered by the boosted torque curve of the 5.3 liter. But you can see it made a lot more, if you compare the torque curves of the NA torque curves between the 5.3 and the 8.1, you could see the difference is like 150 foot-pounds. between the two NA combinations. The 8.1 makes a lot more power down low because it's so much bigger. So here's a question for you, and I want you to answer in the comments. If we were to run the 8.1 NA motor and the 5.3 NA motor, even though they make the same peak power, the 8.1 makes a lot more torque and a lot more average power because it's bigger. Run in the same car with the same trans and the same gearing, which one of them is going to be quicker and faster down the quarter mile? So go ahead and answer in the comments. And then now I have a second question for you. So what happens if we did the same scenario, both motors in the same vehicle, same trans, but we were able to adjust the gearing in the smaller motor, because the smaller motor is actually going to want more gearing. It makes peak power at a higher engine speed. So it will benefit from more gear. So if we were able to adjust the gearing in the 5.3 liter, could it then keep up with the bigger motor down the quarter mile? Let me know in the comments. But as we're going through here, let's take a look. Here is our final view. This was the torque curve on the turbo 8.1 liter. And as you can see, just like there's a big difference between the torque curve NA between the 5.3 and the 8.1 liter, when they're boosted, we see the same thing. This thing had a massive amount of torque, almost 850 foot-pounds down low. And you can see it was better than the torque curve of the 5.3 almost everywhere, although they did cross here at 5,100 RPM, where the 5.3 started making more torque than the turbo 8.1. So that brings up my question again about the gearing. If we added gearing to the 5.3, could we make up that deficit? Let's check out the boost curves. There's nothing I love more than having lots and lots of data, and that's exactly what we have here. We have basically the boost pressure curve versus the back pressure curve with the S475 turbo on our truck NORRIS cammed 5.3 liter. So you can see we are hovering fairly close to 7 to 7.5 pounds of boost. We started a little over 6 down here at the very beginning. And I want you to take a look at the back pressure curve, and that's this rising curve. So up until 5,700 RPM or so, we had less back pressure than boost pressure. And that was our crossover point at 5,700 RPM. So remember that, because we're going to compare it to the 8.1. But we had out here at the peak at 6,500 RPM, we had 8.4 pounds of back pressure and 7.3 pounds of boost pressure. So basically we had 1 more pound of back pressure than boost pressure, and that only happened past 5,700 RPM. So here's what happened. Here's a comparison on the turbocharged 8.1 liter, and you can see that's in red. And like the 5.3 liter, the S475 did well on the 8.1 and had less back pressure than boost pressure, but the crossover point for that combination was way down here at 3,800 RPM, roughly 2,000 RPM earlier than it did on the smaller 5.3 liter. And we had a little bit more back pressure, a little bit more peak back pressure. We had 8.9 pounds of back pressure with 6.9 pounds of boost at that point. So we had about 2 pounds more back pressure than boost pressure on the bigger motor. And the crossover point occurred earlier, telling us a couple of things. One, this is a bigger motor. It makes more low-speed power. It's going to make that particular turbo much more responsive on the bigger motor than it is on the 5.3 liter. But because they made the same NA horsepower and we added the same amount of boost, they basically made the same power with the turbo. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what did we learn from this little adventure comparing our truck NORRIS cammed 5.3 liter L33 and the 8.1 liter Gen 7 big block? Well, we learned the following thing. Even though these two motors that made the same basic peak power, at least peak horsepower, have wildly different torque curves, and that has a dramatic effect on power. But the important thing, as with all of these tests, it showed that both of these cams, the stock 8.1 liter production cam that came from Chevrolet and the truck NORRIS cam. Do you think that Chevrolet designed their stock 8.1 liter to be a turbo cam? Do you think that Brian Tooley Racing designed their truck NORRIS cam to be a turbo cam? And yet both of them work very well under boost. And that's the takeaway from this. Obviously, there's dramatically different ones, and I want to know which one of those would you choose to put in your car. Do you want all the torque of the 8.1? Do you want the more RPM and gearing offered by maybe a 5.3? Once again, let me know in the comments, but both of them are awesome. But when we added boost to either one of these combinations, all the boost did was elevate and mirror whatever was there NA. I'm Richard Holder. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff, and I will keep testing. More and more coming up.